Thank you for that very generous introduction. But I can tell you before going any further that Megan and Paul, that you just heard from, were superb ambassadors for this university. It was a privilege and an honour to have them with us down in South Africa, and the work that they have done or started to do there will be continued, is being continued by the community that we serve. So we're really excited about that as one of the more recent expressions of the partnership between Project Hope, United Kingdom, and East Tennessee State University. I'm just going to see a clock in the room. I'm going to take my watch off and put it down here. You know, a young boy went to church with his father for the first time, and he wasn't sure about what was going on, and people were standing up and sitting down at various times. Father was trying to tell him what was actually happening, and he said, well, when they stand up, that means that they're going to read the scriptures, and this is like they're respecting what is happening, and when they kneel down, that's when they pray. And then the service went on, and the lad was asking all sorts of questions, and then the preacher took his watch off and put it on the pulpit. And the little boy said, what does that mean? And his father said, absolutely nothing, son, absolutely nothing. I promise you I'm not going to abuse that this evening. To me, this, honestly, I say this from the heart, is one of the greatest honours and privileges of the last decade for me, to come here, to be not just with colleagues, not just with people that have a passion for making this world a better place, but actually to meet with friends. And so the last 2 days will abide in my memory as being very special, stimulating, a very stimulating time. And it really has been an honour to come here. I was faced with a little dilemma in planning to come here because I had a choice. Tomorrow is the 80th birthday celebration, the birthday of somebody who, for many, many years, through the work that I've done, has been an inspiration and just one of those role models that I aspire to. Just if I could be like 1% of what this person is, then that would make my life much more significant than it is. And that person is Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu. A few months ago, Desmond Tutu retired from his public life. He said at 80, or coming up 80 years, I've done enough and I'm going to take a back seat now. On the day that he retired and announced that retirement, he actually said, I will make an exception to become a patron and supporter of the Thoughtful Path programme. We were tremendously encouraged by that. It was a real endorsement of what we're trying to do. It was a recognition that it accords with some of the things that he finds so important. It also happens to be, the township in which we're working happens to be his childhood home. So there's an emotional connection there. So I was invited to go and spend this very special occasion with him and his family. His sister is a great friend of ours in Munseyville. She's going down there, some of our staff, and I was invited to be there. But I had this commitment to come to East Tennessee State University. And then I heard, actually, well, this invitation to go to the party of Desmond Tutu, his 80th birthday, coincides with another invitation with that, and that was to meet the Dalai Lama, who was due to be there, but I just heard this evening that actually his visa was cancelled or never given, so actually he couldn't be there. So I'm going to miss that opportunity anyway. But I can honestly say that this coming here, meeting with you, was actually more important and more significant to me than those other opportunities, because we're working together, we share so much, and it's a real honour to be here. This is a friendship with a focus. We can have lots of friendships, we can hang out, we can do some good things, but this is a friendship with a focus that is going somewhere. And it's a friendship that spans 3 continents. I come, you will know from my accent, and also the name of my organisation, Project Hope UK, come from the United Kingdom. But our focus right now, for reasons that I will try to explain to you, right now is in South Africa. Not that we've forgotten the rest of the world. We're an organisation that has a passion for child health right around the world, particularly in the developing communities. But for strategic reasons, we've decided to really focus for the next period of our existence on South Africa or Southern Africa. So, before I go into the detail of what I have to say, I'd like to just set some objectives so we all agree with where we're going. Firstly, I'd like to engage in a discussion about the challenges faced by HIV/AIDS impacted orphans and those that are trying to support them. Secondly, looking here for us to gain a little more understanding of how communities can move beyond dependency. What we have seen through our work around the world is so many communities that are the recipients of support from the international community. Actually, along with that goes a dependency which is actually quite disabling and disempowering. So how can we move beyond that so that local communities can assume genuine leadership for the things that affect them? How can they be masters of their own destiny? Thirdly, we'll look at some strategies for sustainable OVC, that's orphans and vulnerable children. I'm sure you know that. Actually, I prefer to use the term orphans and other vulnerable children. So that's the OVC, that's what OVC is there for. And then lastly, to identify who are the change makers within the process of bringing sustainability and undermining the process of dependency and disempowerment that we see through so much international programming. So that's what we're going to be trying to do. That's what you can test me against at the end of this presentation. Before going further, I think it's important that you know some of my filters. Megan and Twanda gave a very generous introduction. Thank you for that. But we all look at the world through filters. We have our own map of the world, which is not necessarily the same as other people. We are the sum total of what has gone into us, the experiences that we've had. I think it's important that we just look at this. We've already heard of, I've been in the not-for-profit sector for 30 years. My background is in coaching. I have diplomas in business development coaching, in personal coaching, in life coaching, member of the International Coach Federation. So coaching is in my DNA. It's actually helping people to move beyond the limiting beliefs that we all have in our lives to make the most of the opportunities that life affords to us. So that's one of my backgrounds for a long time. I started my first introduction to not-for-profit work was working, as you heard earlier, with disconnected youth, young people, actually young people from gangs in some of our major cities in the UK, and developing a centre for them. It was actually the first ever residential theme park in the UK. It was called Fort Rocky, and it was based on the Canadian Rockies in the 1890s, and young people could come there, forget about the pressures that they had, all the expectations that they had within their gangs, and for the first time for many of them, really find out what achievement was all about. From there I went to work with homeless children in London. Sadly, in the 1980s, as a moment, many children and young people on the streets of London, and certainly as far as the under 16s and to a certain extent the under 18s are concerned, there is very little of a safety net for those that are living there. Between 16 and 18, young people don't get any benefits. They're faced with some very stark choices about their life, and so it's a privilege to be able to work with them. Through that, I started looking at what causes young people to end up on the streets of London. It's a pretty hostile place. Some of our more reactionary media were saying, well, they choose to be there. We don't need to help them. It's their choice. And they're absolutely right. The choice was to stay behind at home with maybe an abusive stepfather that was threatening sexual violence against them or indulging in sexual activity with them. It was a pretty hostile environment there, and many children escaping from that sort of scenario to come onto the streets of London. But actually, even more so, what we found was that the young people that we were working with, a huge proportion, I'm talking about nearly 80%, had been in local protective care. And the main reason for that was actually sexual or violent abuse within the home. Taken into care, too badly damaged to be able to foster out in an ordinary family, and ended up failed by the system and on the streets. So looking at the causes of that, I started working closely with somebody that you will recognise. I'll put the picture up in a moment, with the survivors of serious child abuse. I dislike intently the word victim. There are victims, they're usually dead. But people that have come through negative experiences, to put that word upon them means that things happen to them and it actually disempowers. I'm passionate about empowerment of people. So survivors of serious abuse, because what we were seeing was a pattern there. Downward spiral, children abused, going into government care, the care system failing them, ending up on the streets, then probably in jail or or a short life. And so working there with this lady who you probably will recognise, her own life cut tragically short, the Royal Highness the Princess of Wales, Princess Diana. And she had a real commitment to helping children that had suffered abuse, and worked with us to establish a pioneering centre in that field to help to break the vicious cycle so that children could be free and actually enjoy the life that they've been given. From that, yet more abuse. This time on the streets in the cities of Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1993-94, Yugoslavia just descended into Europe's most bloody conflict since the end of World War II. Half the population displaced, 100,000 plus, probably 130,000 people losing their lives, and children were caught up within that scenario. Nobody helping, or very few people trying to help them to understand what had happened to them so that they did not go on and repeat the violence in the future. So looking around for other organisations, it became pretty obvious that actually we needed to start a new foundation. Most of the not-for-profit organisations were pulling their team out at a time when there were 1,000 shells an hour dropping in the streets of Moscow and similar things, snipers around Sarajevo and the other big cities. So it was a dangerous place. But it was far more dangerous for the children that had no means of escape, to live in that environment. And to, one of the things, I'll tell you a story here of somebody, probably the first child that I met in Bosnia when I went there. This has a relevance of what I'm going to with, so bear with me on this one. But one of the first children that I met in Bosnia, in the city of Mostar, as a very young child, been in the home just after the war had started. The door was kicked in by a group of Serbian soldiers who came in front of this boy and gang raped his mother. That left her seriously traumatized with mental problems. She was not able to cope, sat in the corner of the home, completely destroyed by that experience, and this had been witnessed by this 8-year-old boy. A year later, almost to the day, he was standing in line with his father to collect water because the pipe work had disintegrated because of the conflict, so they're standing by a water pipe in the city of Mostar, in East Mostar, in Bosnia, and his father was decapitated by a sniper's bullet in front of the boy. Now, do you know any power on this planet that can actually take away that anger, that betrayal, that hatred, and stop him becoming the Ratcon Mladic of the future? That was our challenge. And it is possible. So that was the work that I was involved in. I'm not here to talk about that at the moment. I then went to Project Hope, became the executive director in 2004. The organisation had many highly acclaimed programs, which I'm very proud. Successful health interventions, but there were some question marks over that. There were questionable long-term outcomes, and many of the projects that we were most proud of actually collapsed a year or two after the funding ran out, and we handed them over, transitioners to local ownership. And another issue here that we over my early part of my tenure in my role that became apparent was that there was growing concern about the orphan and vulnerable children problem within sub-Saharan Africa. And that's really what I want to share with you this evening. So let's just have a look at that. Orphans and other vulnerable children in Africa. Well, first of all, there are 22.5 million approximately people living with HIV and AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa. That is 2/3 of the global total, although the region accounts for less than 10% of the world's population. So a disproportionate amount of the HIV issues are there within sub-Saharan Africa. What we've seen is 14.8 million children that have been orphaned as a result of the AIDS epidemic. And furthermore, it's calculated that every 14 seconds a child loses a parent to HIV and AIDS. So this is a growing problem. I understand from those that know far more about this than I do, probably many of you, that actually HIV infections have begun to peak in some places, and that's very encouraging. But as far as the orphan crisis is concerned, there's a lag, and so the numbers are still rising, and that is a major challenge. Now, for every orphan, there is estimated to be another 3 children who are deemed to be seriously vulnerable by virtue of their proximity to the HIV and AIDS situation. So we're not just talking about those that have lost parents, there are others that are at home looking after parents or in some way seriously disadvantaged because of the epidemic that is sweeping through their continent. These are figures made from from UNAIDS. So obviously there's a personal cost to this problem. First of all, increased poverty and deprivation. HIV robs people of their opportunity to earn a living. And as far as children are concerned, when their parents die in Africa, there are not many orphanages. At least there are not a vast number of orphanages. So the normal fallback position is that a child who's lost parents will then go and live with an auntie or an uncle, maybe in another community with which he or she is not familiar. So that happens. That puts an added burden on that family. And so we see children that are orphaned very often slipping further and further into poverty, along with those that care for them. There's a mental health risk here also for these children. We have one of our advisors for that program is Dr. Kluger from the Department of Social Policy and Social Work at Oxford University. She's done some work with the South African government and calculated that a child that is orphaned through AIDS is 7 times more likely to experience serious mental issues than a child that is orphaned through murder. When I first heard that figure, I thought, I can hardly believe it. As a matter of fact, I heard that, I was driving home one day in my car and I heard that on the radio, and I didn't know this lady. I phoned her up the next day, I got a number, got through to the university and connected with her. I said, what's going on here? She said, think about it. When a child is orphaned through murder, the community gathers around and they support that child, and there's all sorts of structures for giving help. A child that is orphaned through AIDS will suffer stigma at school, in the home, in the family. And so that explains some of the reasons. Significantly reduced school enrollment is another feature of the problem, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Further health costs. Higher incidence of HIV, sexually transmitted infections and teen pregnancy in orphans and vulnerable children. Let me show you this little graph here. I'm sorry for those of you that don't want to be able to see the detail. We can be able to get these slides and you can look at that. But basically, this is just a snapshot from a community in Zimbabwe. What you see is these darker blue lines here represent the impact of teenage pregnancy, sexually transmitted symptoms, and HIV infection, and a comparison between children that are orphaned and otherwise vulnerable because of HIV and AIDS, and non-orphan children. What you see in teenage pregnancy, just in this snapshot of one community, is 8.3% of the children that were orphaned against 1.9% of those that were living with their family. So a disproportionate amount of the problems, story of the orphan, similar to STI infections, double the amount pretty well. And in HIV within this community, they have no incidence at all of children that were living at home with their parents actually being diagnosed with HIV positive, whereas 3.2% of those that were orphans. So there's a sort of compound set of problems here. Reduced life expectancy also. Now it's hard to get hold of some really reliable data on this, but we'll take a crack at it. What we can see is that the USA, these are World Bank data. USA has life expectancy up there. Actually, the mean, it's different for men and women, but I understand that the mean, I think, is just about 79 years. Now, we do slightly better than that in the UK, because we're about 80, just under 81 years. There are one or two things that we can beat you on. The weather, for example. I know you think that the weather in England is not too good, but let me tell you that when I arrived at Heathrow Airport, London, on Monday to come over here, it was 90 degrees, just touching 90.5 degrees Fahrenheit. I arrived a few hours later at Dulles, and it was 50 degrees. So, anyhow, life expectancy at the moment in the UK, slightly just tipping ahead of your own. In the Republic of South Africa, the average life expectancy there is 52 years. Now, that is actually fairly, like so many of these figures, there's some disparities within that. 52 years. For the white people, the more privileged people in some of the cities, their life expectancy is very similar to that in the USA. But for those living in the townships, significantly lower. Now we've calculated here, trying to gather as much data as we can, that in Republic of South Africa, AIDS orphans have a life expectancy of around about 30 years. Tragically short. Just put this quote up. This comes from HIV/AIDS specialists. The social and economic consequences of the AIDS epidemic are widely felt, not only in the health sector, but also in education, industry, agriculture, transport, human resources, and the economy in general. The AIDS epidemic in Sub-Saharan Africa continues to devastate communities, rolling back years of development. There's been a lot of investment over the years from your country taking a lead in that. Huge investment in Sub-Saharan Africa, and much of that is being undermined because of this ticking time bomb of orphans and other vulnerable children. Because the majority, on average, an AIDS orphan is unlikely, get this, ever to make a net contribution to their community. In other words, they're going to take out a lot more through health benefits, social benefits, and the other costs of just keeping them alive. They're going to take out more than they are able to put back. And most of them will never be economically active. And yet, these are not necessarily, they're not necessarily people that are HIV positive. These are people that are impacted by the epidemic. Now, the cost of doing nothing, we can do nothing. We can stand there. And what we see is that approximately 60 million orphans and vulnerable children continuing with shortened, blighted lives. An economic catastrophe. I was telling some of the students earlier today that I met a while ago with the Finance Minister and Minister of Women and Children's Affairs in Malawi. And they were telling me that their government is really very worried that it will become economically unviable within the next 5 to 10 years because, not of HIV per se, but because of the orphan crisis that they have within their own country. And they're not in the worst position. So this really is a ticking time bomb. And furthermore, another of the costs of doing nothing is that this problem just gets transferred to the next generation. Unless we do something, unless we intervene, unless we find a new paradigm, the problem gets transferred to the next generation. Now let's look at some other things here. First of all, Western approaches. How have we worked in the past? How have we worked one of the programs that we've had for dealing with this crisis. Well, there are two different approaches. First of all, the single issue approach. We've been very good with it. I'm taking fire here from my sector, not yours. I'm talking about the international development, the not-for-profit sector, as well as some government departments and the way that we work. But we focused, in some ways, we focused on single issues in isolation. And we've done some incredibly good work within those sectors, those issues, focusing our attention on certain challenges. Ambassador Mark Dydal appeared at the staff conference of Project Hope in 2007, and he said organisations insisting in the future in single-track approaches to orphan and vulnerable children care, and those failing to embrace truly integrated programming in combating AIDS, HIV and AIDS, would render themselves as being irrelevant. It is essential, said Ambassador Dydal, to see children and indeed all affected by HIV AIDS in the context of their wider environment. So this single track approach that says we can come back and say we've really done a good program here, and then we can move back with the people who die anyway. Well, there's going to be other things come along and impact them and actually take away the benefit that we've been able to bring through our programming. So Dydal was very clear about that. PEPFAR had been supporting single-track approaches, and they were beginning to change. And what he said is, unless they keep organisations changing, then PEPFAR are not going to be funding them because what they're doing is ineffective. So then we developed integrated models, and there's some great models around. They're externally funded because people need the support. There's a rapid assessment process that takes place based on community representatives. Short life programs, 1 to 5 years typically. Subservient local leaders and managers, audit-led monitoring and evaluation, and eventual handover to the people that are running those programs. Sounds pretty good. External funding. Well, these are poor countries, so why not fund them externally? We live even without problems of economy and so on. In the last few years, we're still very rich relative to the issues that we're facing there. So we'll put a smiley face next to that, and also the rapid assessment. We've got no time to waste. People are dying. We need to get on with the problem, with addressing the problem. So let's put a rapid assessment in place. Short term, well, we need results. Quickly, 5 years is not really that short. You can see some, Ned and Twanda were in Munseyville, and they saw incredible results in 7 weeks. They just started some things going in 7 weeks. So surely a year, 2 years, 5 years, that's pretty good. So we put a smiley face there. Subservient local leadership, well, people are going to start somewhere. So we'll bring them into the system, we'll teach them everything that we know, and then we'll set them loose to run the program. So we'll put a smiley face there. Audit-led monitoring and evaluation. Well, look, we're all accountable. Our donors give us money, they trust us. And they say, go ahead and do a program, and this is what we need to see from that. So we need to be audited to make sure we're actually delivering against the contract that we have, whether it's with USAID or the European Union or whatever it is from. And then eventually we'll hand over to local leaders. So we'll put a smile there because we want sustainability. So we're going to hand over to local people because we can't be there forever. So far we've got a pretty good situation now. I don't know whether you know this guy. Is he somebody you're familiar with here on this side of the pond? Well, let me tell you a story about Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes, his great assistant and supporter is Dr. Watson. I don't know whether Dr. Watson came from ETSU, maybe he did. I'm not sure. But Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes decided to go camping. So they went off together and found where they wanted to be, and they settled down for a lovely meal over the campfire and a good bottle of wine. After which they were feeling tired, so they went off to sleep. And a few hours later, Sherlock Holmes woke up and he nudged Watson and he said, Watson, look up into the sky and tell me what you see. And Watson said, I see a million stars. This is just incredible. That's why I said see these millions of stars. So Holmes said, well, what does that tell you? So he said, and I'll try and quote it here, he said, well, astronomically, it tells me that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Astrologically, I observe that Saturn is rising through Leo. Horologically, I deduce that the time is about 3:15. Theologically, I see that God is all powerful and that we are small and insignificant. And meteorologically, I suspect that we're going to have a beautiful day tomorrow. What do you see, Holmes? Holmes thought for a minute and then he said, well, it's elementary, Watson. What I see is that you are stupid. Somebody has stolen our tent. Sometimes the thing that is most obvious, the thing that is right in our face, are the things that we miss. And let's get back to this diagram here. We've got lots of smiley faces. I'm going to take the smile off some of our faces now by saying that actually external funding, what we have seen in our work, is that external funding usually, if it's not handled extremely carefully, distorts what we're trying to do. It disempowers people. I could go into that if I had more time, and maybe somebody wants to ask a question about that. But it distorts what is the reality of the situation. Let me paint a picture here. Sometimes we come into a community with, let's use South African currency. I've got 5 million rand in my back pocket from the British government to run a program. So what happens is the local people in the community say, look, Brooks has got money, we need jobs, let's apply for a job. So eventually we need people to run the program. So we'll employ them and we'll pay them a wage which will probably be we're interested if only they knew. And so they've got to demand a wage that is higher than the local salary levels. And then down the road, Save the Children have got a program and they covered our worker because he's better than theirs, so they pay him a little bit more and they nudge him over that way, and then World Vision are over the other side. So we get, as NGOs, we get into a competition and up go the rates. Right? Now what happens is they want to rent the best houses, and now the local people can't afford to rent the decent houses within their own community. So see the pattern that is emerging. So external funding is not all the smiley face that it should be. Rapid assessments, I could spend a lot of time here on this one, which we haven't got, but rapid assessments based on community representatives. What I found in working in our community in Monsignor, South Africa, is that when we go to our community representatives, very often what we're dealing with, there are people that have a political bias, that have an axe to grind, even people within the health service. They'll tell us stories rather than giving us the reality, and so we can be misled. Short term, well, I'm going into that now, but short term, what we're trying to do is to see generational change. We want to see that what we're doing now is having an impact beyond. Subservient local leadership. What's happening with so many of these international programs is that we work with communities. The decisions are being made in Washington, in London, in Paris, in Bonn. And people are not learning very much until the end of the program, and then we have a rapid process of trying to impart all our knowledge to these people because they've got to run the program afterwards. And then we clear off because the funding's run out, and we come back a year or two later and the program has failed. And we say, well, stupid people, we taught them everything we know. But why did it fail? One, because we're expecting them to do it for nothing. It cost us $5 million or 5 million rand, whatever it be. That's the first thing. But the second thing is they never owned the program. It was always our program. We never listened to what they had to say. And why should they? There was no emotional buy-in. This is very typical across the NGO sector. I know I'm making generalizations, but stick with it. I know that audit-led monitoring and evaluation doesn't necessarily lead to best practice. We could comply with the terms of the grant, but if we did things a little bit different, we might have been able to get double the impact. But all we're looking at is over our shoulder, is the donor happy with what we're doing, rather than is the community happy with what we're doing. And then the eventual handover to local leaders, well, I've already said there's very little emotional buy-in from that. So What I want to look at now is the birth of the Thoughtful Path. Thoughtful Path program came about because we looked with great dissatisfaction, pride in some of the things that we'd achieved. I don't want to demean the work of some of our professional colleagues ourselves in bringing some really good things to pass over the years in isolation. Those things are there, lessons that we can learn from them still, and try to apply them into the Thoughtful Path program was born out of frustration. I'm sorry to say that because I like to be positive. So where do we start with the Thoughtful Path? How do we start? What are the principles of moving this program forward to try to find a new paradigm that is going to be sustainable, owned by community, where they're making the money, they're taking leadership, and they can sustain changes that can then influence other communities around them? We're looking at birthing a movement of change within South Africa and African society. So where do we start? Well, there was a process that I won't go into now in terms of why we ended up in Munseyville. There was a long process of assessment that ended up with a community that was engaged, many problems, a microcosm of the problems of orphans and vulnerable children around Africa, but nevertheless, it was engaged. But where did we start? Some of you that have been in some of the meetings that I've had so far will have heard this, and I keep repeating it in the hope that eventually people will start getting the message, because this is the essence of where we're at. It's so simple. This is where we start. Certainly through empowering community to create a sustainable path that gives the most vulnerable children the opportunity to grow into healthy, productive adults. So this is not about health interventions. I am not, and I apologize for saying this in this particular audience, but I am not remotely interested, personally, shoot me down in flames afterwards, but I'm not remotely interested in health interventions. Doesn't motivate me. What we need to see is outcomes of healthy people. Not healthy. We can do all the health interventions and still people die young and unproductive. What we're looking at is an outcome which is about healthy, productive adults instead of children dying young. So when we looked at this program, we said, okay, we're going to make a commitment for at least 10 years to this model. Now this is the essence. This is our starting point, the mango tree. Megan and Tanya are going to laugh at this point because they know there are no mango trees in Munseyville where we're working. But this is a bit of a metaphor for a place where people sit and exchange their stories. What we have done with this program, more than anything else that we've ever done in our history and anything that I've ever done in my life, is sit with people for hour after hour, listening to their story, listening to what it's like to live there, but also discovering some incredible things about them. Discovering some, the people that we're working with are incredibly resourceful. They're uneducated because they've never had that opportunity, but they're incredibly wise and knowledgeable about the challenges and the solutions. I was telling some of the students earlier about something that we were doing with children that had suffered serious sexual abuse in Munseyville. And the way that those children, young children, have been through that experience, and without our help and assistance, by just giving them an opportunity to sit under the mango tree and talk about their story, they developed a strategy that identified the roots of the problem, the manifestation of the problem as it affected them, the tentacles that were affecting and blighting their life, but also the strategies for eradicating that or mitigating that problem within their community. Children. So what we found sitting under the mango tree was people were incredibly resourceful. What we also found was that people, when we sat with them, could identify problems that we would never, within 50 years, be able to identify. So sitting in Washington or London, developing a program for this community was completely ineffective. We had to take on board what they were saying. Now, I'm just going to come on here briefly and show you how this program has been constructed by the people within the community in which we're working in Munseyville. Now, I know you can't see the detail here, so I'm going to point out some things to you. First of all, there we are, at the top there. This is the focus, the kings and the queens of the program, we call them in Munseyville. orphans and vulnerable children, everything is up for their benefit. The whole program is designed for them. It's not a, they're not a byproduct in this, that the absolute focus is a program. The next line down that you see there, this orange salmon-coloured line here, this represents a pretty poor representation, but it's a wall that actually creates a prison, a jailhouse around children, preventing them from moving in and moving out to be the people that they are capable of being. And that wall is made up of many different components. Poor physical health needs to be addressed. Over here, newborn nutrition, insecurity. There's a whole bunch of things there. For every child, that wall is going to be made up of many different building blocks, and they're going to be different. No child is going to be the same. So how dare we systemize something and go and say this will solve the problem of the orphans and vulnerable children of that community? We had to develop a integrated approach that addressed all the issues, took away the wall and allowed those children to be the solution to somebody else's problem further down the track. Now, so we'll forget this one here, this resource centre. That is an important feature of what we're doing, but it's not relevant to this discussion. Underneath, you heard Wanda mention this earlier, are 7 what we call hubs, identified by the community as areas where they felt there were needs that needed to be, that they could address with our support. Incidentally, our program is not about doing anything for these people that they can do for themselves. Absolutely not. It's about identifying what they're doing, maybe at a low level because of the opportunities they've had, and then with them taking that to a higher level by leveraging our international partnerships and the opportunities that we have. So here we have early childhood development, after-school care, youth support and development. And this doesn't come to this, sports, community sports, actually sports and arts program, child rights and protection. 1 in 5 children in Munseyville has experienced sexual abuse, and big issues there. Then back up to the top, community strengthening. This actually is about strengthening a community to increase its economy, to address issues like water and sanitation and trash clearance and everything else, to look at healthy lifestyles, so many more things. The whole community needs to be strengthened because we cannot work with children in isolation from their community. And then at the bottom of the corner here is CBO, that's community-based organisation, partner capacity building. Who are the activists? Let's build their capacity. Let's help them to do what they're doing far more effectively. Now I just want to take one of those briefly and explain a bit more about it. Early childhood development. These labels, the white labels around here, are just illustrative. There are many other factors and features which go around this theme of early childhood development. Why is this so important? This is a chart here from the Lancet, published in 2007, which shows the impact of poverty on children. Poor development, starting with very young children. Poverty causes stunting, and a number of issues, but basically leading the message from this is that unless we work with children in very early stages of their development, then we miss it completely. I want to tell you a little bit about a situation in Munseyville, as I found it a couple of years ago. I first went into some of the preschool facilities within this community. I've unfortunately got a picture to show you of this, but I'll paint the picture. What I saw was up to 80 children in a very small shack, about 4 meters by 2 meters, something like that. Up to 80 children, can you believe that? In a tin shack. Not even enough room in some instances for all the children to be inside, somewhere out in the yard, because there simply was not room on the floor to put them. Dirt floor, no toys, no games, no books, no stimulation, no training for the one elderly lady that was looking after them. I came out at the first place I looked at, there were about 50 children in that. I came out of the room and I wept. I don't mind telling you. I was heartbroken by what I saw, because what I was looking at were the child soldiers, the prostitutes, the gun runners, the people that were caught up because they were denied the capacity to filter information, to start making decisions for themselves. It was a tragic situation. So this chart identified by the programming from published in The Lancet shows again some of the benefits of working with children in those early years. And just to cut to the end here, poverty being addressed, biological risk factors in children being addressed, psychological risk factors also being addressed. The impact of that is felt over here in improvement within the child's emotional, cognitive language and so on, increased school performance, economic performance, intergenerational transmission is all of those issues addressed when we start looking at children in the early years. And what I also tell you from that Lancet series from 2007, what they found from research going back over 30 years was that children that get professionally, carefully delivered early childhood development programs, first of all, more of them enroll in school. They stay in school for longer. They have increased health status. They have increased economic status and are able to look after their own families in a more effective way when they themselves have children. So it's where our work starts with the early childhood development. What we're doing there is professional training for the workers. That granny that I told you about was looking after those 50 children, and many of the others, we have 20 of these elderly people, mostly elderly people, or elderly, some of them are a little bit younger, but they call them the grannies of the community. We have 20 of them now enrolled in a program for the first time in their lives, having professional training, getting a qualification which is internationally recognized in preschool training, preschool care. Well, there's what happened from that. Now there's a whole bunch of impacts that come around this. This is a hub, this early childhood development hub developed by the community. What we've now seen is the women have gone on training and they come back and they've made radical changes. We've got some witnesses, my witnesses, the changes that they're introducing into their establishments. Now the ladies came to us, the women in this program came to us and said, look at the facilities that we have. We've now got better training, we're able to give a much better experience to the children, but we're still in the shack. We want to have a better facility. So I'm expecting them to say, well, we need some money. They said, no, what we need is help so that we can learn how to make bricks, so that we can then manufacture the bricks, build them, and create a permanent facility for the children in our care. This is about empowerment. This is sustainability. It's sitting under the mango tree. It's listening to people's stories, and it's giving them encouragement and the release. It's coaching them to find their own solutions. I can tell you many more stories for that type. So there we are, early childhood development. Very impactful. It's an incredible. The changes are incredible and long-lasting within that process. But that is just one of the 7 hubs that are there. I'm not going to go into, don't worry, because I'm really wound up with what I have to say. What I want to do now, before we go to some questions, is just look at some of the conclusions. This is just rapid run through of some of the experiences that we have there. Probably raising far more questions than I've had to answer here this evening. But some of the conclusions that we found from our work. First of all, there is a very long journey ahead. There are no quick fixes with this type of work. We have to drive a new paradigm forward. We have got to get away from these old methods of working that are unsustainable and leave people disempowered, and we have to find ways of people becoming empowered to make the changes themselves within their community. But there's a long journey ahead. Secondly, we have to minimise unsustainable external funding. This comes as a bit of a surprise to people, and I've had some real tussles with my board over this very issue, because they say, Paul, we've still got to pay the salaries, we've got to pay the rent, we've got to do what we've got to do. But not at the expense of the people that we claim to serve. And some of the financial modelling that the not-for-profit sector work serves our American or British organisations very well, because they're taking a cut to pay for their head office costs and everything else, and so they want to push more money into the programme in order to get a bigger kickback to pay their own costs, particularly in times of recession. But what it's doing is disempowering people by taking away their choices. So we've got to minimise that. Third conclusion that we've got from our work is that we need to stimulate local solution-focused dialogue. What we say, like two little mantras here, one goes with that last point, about funding. I say that every pound that we take in, dollar that we take into South Africa, into this program, actually represents compromise and potentially a failure. Every rand that we see developed, coming out, stimulated from within that community, that starts looking like a success. We've taken it from the outside, failure and disempowerment. We create that, or help the community to create it within, which is what's happening in Munseyville. That looks like sustainability. We have to work for a new paradigm. But also with solutions. We take a solution in, even from a thinking place like Johnson City. We take a solution into Munseyville, it is probably going to be too wrapped up in our cultures and our understanding, and is doomed possibly to failure or underperformance. But every solution that we can see spawn from within the communities, people start looking at their own problems as they sit together under the mango tree, that looks like success. We're nearly through. Doing for the community what it can do for itself is a sin against it. That's a pretty bold statement, but I profoundly believe it. If I go and do for somebody in Munseyville what clearly they can do for themselves, they lose the capacity to do it for themselves, and we're locking them into an old system which, well, I don't want to go there because you'll probably think I'm a liberal or something. I don't know. What I'm saying is that actually we can easily sin against the people that we're trying to help by pushing our desire to help too far. Every hour spent under the mango tree saves a month of frustration and wasted resource. Just a couple more. There is a massive role for the international community. Everything I said, I hope you don't feel that in any way there is less of a role for us because now the community is doing it all. What we've seen is from some of your own people going down there is a massive role, not just in Munseyville, but across southern Africa and other parts of the world, for people with the right heart, people that come into the community with a spirit of inquiry, a desire to learn rather than their solutions. And they're through that relationship to help people to take what they're doing up to a higher level. Healthy people, not health interventions. That is our commitment. Empowerment has early green shoots, you have to look for them though. When you start empowering people in a place like Munseyville, you do a few little things. Megan and Twanda started to build some gardens. They've been talking about them for a while. They took the opportunity, well, Megan and Twanda were there with them to start building some vegetable gardens. And actually, literally, the green shoots started to come. But more particularly, from that early start, they just built one or two gardens. The next thing, when they came, after they left, there's been a movement, a mini movement for change, with people taking a little bit of area back of their house to create vegetable gardens so that, as a community, they can create a soup kitchen to support children that are hungry within their community. Coaching to move beyond deeply embedded limited beliefs. We have a coaching role, not an intervention role. And lastly, I'll end with this final word that comes from Sally Grant McGregor and others from the Child Development Steering Group, published in the Lancet. The problem of poor child development will remain unless substantial effort is made to mount appropriate integrated programs. There is increasing evidence that early intervention can help prevent loss of potential in affected children, and improvement can happen rapidly. In view of the high cost of poor child development, both economically and in terms of equality and individual well-being, and the availability of effective interventions, we can no longer justify inactivity. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to me. So we've got time, I think, to take some questions. I'm not sure actually what time this session should finish. Have I overrun already, or do we have some time?
It's usually over with questions.
Okay, that's good. The night is yet young.
Well, Paul, let me start with a question. I have a lot of appreciation for what we can learn from you, the ETSU community. How can we be helpful?
To continue along the path that you've already started. What I can say, and I'm not just saying this because they're sitting down here in the second row, but if you could find us some, 10 Megans, 10 wonders,
It's a frightening thought.
to come with their spirit. The great thing is that from the start, Megan and Wanda, I'm sorry to embarrass you, but these people came with an attitude that they were there to learn, that they were there to build a connection, a rapport with the people that they come to serve. They came with a beautiful spirit, which immediately built that rapport and gave them the opportunity to go beyond that and do some work for the community, with the community. What I would say is if you are producing people like this, then send us some more. That's the most obvious thing. But there are other things. We are working. We're looking towards help and support in measuring the impact of what we do. Ultimately, this program, if it's going to be of influence, we want other people to come and look at that program, feel the vibe, take that back to their own communities and help them do it. But ultimately, if this is to be successful, then governments, finance ministers, health ministers, social development ministers need to take on board the challenge and make policy changes to what they're doing. That will only happen if we can capture hard data to prove a return on every rand, every dollar that is spent, every hour of social investment, whatever it may be. We need to capture data. So there is a request, it's a standing request to the university here to help us to develop those programs of capturing the data so that we really know and have the evidence of the change in people's lives.
Hi, I was listening to your presentation and I heard that you spoke about the grandmother who kind of is like a caregiver to many of the orphans, and who and the women who spoke up and wanted to improve the village. And I was wondering, what role do the men play in the village that you work in?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. There are very few men that are involved in the early childhood development program, but some of those other hubs, some of the other 6, there is very good male participation within those, particularly in regard to things like sport. And maybe I'm stereotyping them, but what we see is the men gravitate to sport-type programs. And so the men in this community are very active. What we were looking for when we selected Munseyville was a community that was representative or like a microcosm of similar communities right across southern Africa, villages, townships, and so on, but also a community that was engaged, where people were proactive in doing things already, and then we could help them to take that up to a higher level, as I said earlier. So there are men, many men. Dean Wyckoff has some pictures that he took when he was visiting with us a while ago, with groups of men really running some of these hubs, discussing things, sitting under the mango tree, developing concepts and so on. So, we have, I think, pretty equal participation. How do you see things there? Would you say there were men in equal numbers, or?
Thank you. Yeah, there's a handful of men here and there that help a bit, but I would say it's in the community strengthening hubs, community-based organizations. Some of the men are more likely to have paying jobs, so they have a little bit less time maybe for some of the other things around the community. But I'd say that they're involved in that, this growing core movement, that core group of men that are kind of stimulating the growth of males helping out.
Okay, I mean, one of the things that we saw, one of the ways that we tested this community 3-4 years or 3.5 years ago when we started our work there, just trying to get to know them before we made the commitment to the Thoughtful Path program and using this as the focus location for that, we tried a few things. We came into the community with a concept called the Village Savings and Loans Program. It was a microcredit program, but it did not depend on external funding. It was something that was entirely locally funded. So people would come along for a few weeks and they would pay just a small amount of money. These are people in poverty, they didn't have a lot, but they would pay some of their money into the pot. And then after a period of time, they then had a meeting which was similar to the Shark Pit, is that?
Shark Tank.
Shark Tank, okay? You know what I'm talking about here, where people, the community people that were members of that group came and they pitched their ideas to their peers to see who could get the investment. So they'd take money from the pot and they'd give it to the community, and they'd have to invest that to bring the money back with a small interest, which was determined locally. It was actually a very successful program. We just ran it for 6 months to start with to see how it would go, and then we left them to it. I was there about 2 years after that and was invited actually in a part of town that I didn't know about and thought at that time. I was taken by the hand by one of the community members. She led me to a shack and I thought she was going to, ask me for money. But what she wanted to do was to show me the repayment meeting that they were having at that particular point. I just happened to walk through that second, and at the time they were having a repayment session. So there they are sitting around the table. I think there were 8 people and 3 of them were men. The leadership of that group, and actually what we have seen, this expands a bit more on your question, men are engaged there, but the real leaders are actually the women. I don't know what that says. I don't know how that accords with your experience here in Johnson City, but the real movers and shakers that we are seeing are the women. But what we're trying to do actually, maybe this is the wrong strategy, we're trying to shame some of the men by saying, look, why do you have to lag behind all the time? You start taking the initiative, and we see a spark with you, we'll fan that flame as well.
Mr. Brooks drank most of the Kool-Aid you were serving quite a while ago, and it was wonderful, very flavorful. But how do we deal with what you put on one of your last slides when it's considered to be somewhat unpopular? You had the word equity up there, and many people do not find that the appropriate approach. They will argue with you until they're blue in the face that that is not the superior model, that that's not the model that will get us where we want to go, when there are arguments now that you make, I think are quite compelling, that there's an underproduction from people who are paying for negative externalities from the economic standpoint and so many other standpoints that are costing us. How do you get that across? Not just the NGOs and some enlightened administrations of governments, but to try and get it more to move the center reliably to take on that approach.
Okay. Well, our response to all of those things, I realize, actually even being here within the university over the last 2 days, it's a very interesting concepts that show at some points the inconsistency of our messaging throughout that. What we try to do is take a soft option by, in a sense, hiding behind, I don't think it's a cop-out, but we hide behind the perspectives of the local community. We don't hide behind them really, but we are there to support the local community in what they're doing and not to impose a particular ideology upon them one way or the other. We're there to listen. It may not work for us. We may see some inconsistencies there, but what we're trying to do is reflect and to stimulate them. It's called the thoughtful path because we want this whole process to be thoughtful. We want people locally to be thinking through the solutions that work for them. So that probably is not a very satisfactory answer to you, but it is.
and answer my question.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
You've stated that for a project or a program to be sustainable, it must have buy-in from the community. Are there aspects of the thoughtful paths principles that can be replicated in other areas universally? And if so, what are those? And on the other hand, what aspects must be locally grown within each community and specified?
Yes, I think there are a number of components here that, certainly in my experience, and that's all I can say here, a lot of what we're doing in Munseyville at the moment has been informed very much by some of the things that I've seen we have seen as an organisation in many other countries around the world, and in some cases what I have seen in Bosnia. And some of these sort of concepts actually gel together. One of the, I mentioned right at the beginning that one of our supporters and influences within this program is Desmond Tutu. And effectively, what he's been looking at there is through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, is introducing concepts of peace in a very hostile and very fragile environment post 1994, as they came out of apartheid and started trying to find a new way forward for the rainbow state. How do you actually get people to buy into a peaceful state when they've suffered so much? And some of those messages, some of those concepts need to come across into this program. It actually comes back, sorry to repeat it, it's about sitting under the mango tree. And actually I would challenge people anywhere, in any situation, anybody that's involved in health policy, anybody that's involved in planning some sort of intervention to help people, the question that I would always ask, how long did you sit under the mango tree for before you came to this conclusion? So, I mean, I do think that we've got to open up much directly. Here we have to open our ears. Policymakers need to open their ears and do things that are genuinely in the interests of the people whom they claim to represent. And I know there's some big issues here in America at this particular time around that in health policy.
Thank you, Paul. We'll take one more question.
Hi, my name is Halima, and I just want to ask you one bigger and more of a systemic question. When you were making your presentation, you pointed the idea of, or the issue of the development approach, creating social disequilibrium in some of these communities that you said. And the point is that we go invest huge tons of money, but it results in just bigger outcome. And at the same time, we have this equilibrium created in the society, the level of gap in income, gap in standard of living, created through funding for people involved in this developmental program. So from your experience, what would be your advice to the larger international system and the developmental approach that we have now that may perpetuate this equilibrium that you observe?
Right, I'm not entirely sure that I've captured the question.
The point I'm just trying to point across is, you said when these agencies, international organizations, NGOs enter these communities, they make investment into these communities, paying higher wages to some people and those kind of stuff. That creates a disequilibrium within the society, increasing income inequalities and all those kind of social characteristics and dynamics. And it pertains throughout all the developmental programs in the world. And from your experience, you've observed it. And we have, there's the need to have some form of what? A stop to a trend that you've observed. What would be your advice from a systemic point of view?
Yeah, okay. I think this is, there is a real problem here, and I don't mind criticizing my own sector very much at this point, including my own organization, looking back at some of the things that we've done in the past. We've made some mistakes which we are trying to learn from that and move forward. I just think that actually what we see is, NGOs, international organizations, some of the major interventionist organizations in the world today need to examine themselves very carefully, and their supporters, their donors, their investors need to examine them very much and ask the question, who is the beneficiary of this program? I hate that term, beneficiary. People are always talking to me, who's the beneficiary? Well, I say, well, I take a salary from my job, so I'm a beneficiary. How does that work? But then what they're talking about is the beneficiary, the ultimate beneficiary, the person upon whose focus, in our case, orphans and vulnerable children. Do they really benefit from this? And what I see is vast empires being built on the basis of a financial model that is simply not sustainable. Some of the major organizations, household names that you immediately bring to mind, and I'm pointing, as I'm pointing the finger at them, I'm pointing 3, 4 fingers back at myself on this as well. Who is the beneficiary? And when we come in with our bankrupt models, which actually support our operation back in the UK, in the US, and at the same time as that, we have legitimate expenses and so on, that's fine. But when, through our obsession with paying our own costs back there, we disadvantage people, we disempower them by bringing in this money which is simply not sustainable, then that is something which we don't be accountable for. And I just wish that the public would start asking big questions of some of the major NGOs in the United States, in the United Kingdom, and in Europe. And that's not an answer to the question. I don't know what the strategy is, except for the empowerment of the donors in this, to start asking the difficult questions. Because much of what, when there is a disaster, let me put this way, when there is a disaster, or when there is a country that is in crisis, if you want to know where the aid workers are, where are the international aid workers, in any disaster, I can find them very easily, just like that. I drive into town, and I look for the best hotel that there is in the nearest town. And I look in the car park, and there are the big sort of trucks, big white trucks, with the names of the organizations along the side. Then you go into the big fancy hotel, and there will be the international aid workers having a four-course expenses paid meal while they talk about strategies to mitigate the hunger that the community. Now that's a pretty negative picture. I'm getting pretty angry about this because I've seen it. What these programs do is serve the people back here, but all the pictures, the media machine gets thrown in and behind this. And so whenever there's a picture of somebody doing some relief work, there is the logo of the organisation in the background. And the public back in the US and the UK think, how good is that, without asking the question? And we need to ask questions. Who is the real beneficiary of this? And I think there has to be a pendulum swing back in favour of the people that are in the most need. In our case, it's orphans and vulnerable children. I'm confessing to the fact that we've made some mistakes about that financial modelling in the past. One of our biggest challenges is to get it right in the future. But let us cut that pretends that everything we do in our charitable organisations is good, because a huge amount of it is actually disempowering communities that we serve.
Thank you, Paul. You'd never know that Paul's father was a minister, would you? Paul, that was wonderful, as expected. You're a thoughtful guy with a thoughtful path, right? We have a couple of parting gifts for you, as we say in the States. First of all, we'd like to bestow on you the official title of Humanitarian Scholar in the College of Public Health. We believe you'll be the first one in England, and we're hanging with the tribe. And as always, we have some gifts that won't fit in your carry-on bag. Your very own Encyclopedia of Appalachia.
Wonderful.
And some East Tennessee State University College of Public Health memorabilia. I will very much enjoy looking at this encyclopedia. This is a beautiful part of
of the world. I was so impressed driving down from DC, down this way, that long drive down the 81, and just getting more and more beautiful until I got here. And then when I arrived, I heard that there was a foundation. I met with them this morning that are funding people to encourage them to come and work and invest in this community. I think, wow, what a waste of time that is.